shop, dcreport.org. That's who obtained this return. And tonight, we have this exclusive first look at their reporting at what they have obtained. In just a second, we are going to show you exactly what it is that we've got. We're going to walk through it with David K. Johnston. We're going to get context on it. We're going to get some explanation of what it means. Importantly, we're going to get some explanation and discussion about what further avenues for reporting this may open. But let me tell you first that part of what's very important about this story, about this new document that we're able to bring into public discussion, part of what's most important about it is that for some reason that we cannot discern, this document has been made available. This document has surfaced. It has been handed to a reporter. And that's an important part of this story. That may be the most important part of this story. When Donald Trump declared as a presidential candidate that he would not release his tax returns, he became the first president since the Watergate era to refuse to release his returns. When Richard Nixon said, "I'm not a crook," he wasn't talking about Watergate. He was talking about his taxes. And in fact, he was kind of a crook on his taxes. He handed them over in 1973. In April 1974, the IRS ordered him to pay almost $500,000 in back taxes because, in fact, President Nixon had taken improper deductions and he hadn't enough. I mean, that was the least of his problems in the end, but that was, in fact, one of his problems. And presidents and presidential candidates have released their taxes ever since. Donald Trump's opponent in the presidential campaign this past year, Hillary Clinton, she released every year of her tax returns back to 1977. But Donald Trump refused to release any. He made history by insisting that he would not, that indeed he could not release his tax returns. And it never much made sense on factual grounds. When candidate Donald Trump said he would love to release his tax returns, but he couldn't because his tax returns were under audit, that never made sense. Because even the initial precedent for presidents releasing their tax returns, even Richard Nixon was under audit when he released his tax returns. And since we later learned he was cheating on his taxes, it seems like that was maybe an audit well spent. The IRS has let it be known that there's no legal reason why somebody under audit can't release their taxes. And in fact, since Watergate, every single president and every single vice president has been audited by the IRS every year of their time in office. And they all still routinely release their tax returns to the public every year. So that excuse from Trump and from the Trump campaign, it never made sense. Being under audit is not an excuse for not releasing your tax returns as a candidate or certainly as president. Also, the audit excuse never made sense for his past tax returns. I mean, even if Donald Trump wanted to release nothing that's under current audit, well, what about years for which the audits are completed and closed? I mean, any year of his taxes before, say, 2008, any year that was audited before then, those years would presumably be done being audited by now. Those would be closed. So why not release those earlier tax returns, even if you don't want to release the current ones, for which there isn't really an excuse not to do anyway? Whether or not you are a supporter of Donald Trump in general, whether or not you care what's in his tax returns, it ought to give you pause that his explanation for why he couldn't release them, why he has to make history by being the first person in decades to hold this office without releasing them, it ought to give you pause that his explanations have never made any factual sense. I mean, think about it. The "I'm under audit" excuse makes no sense. And if the "I'm under audit" excuse doesn't make any sense, then what does explain why the president hasn't released any tax returns? When you get an excuse from them that doesn't make sense, you have to look for another reason. All right, the stated explanation here makes no sense. What's the real explanation? Well, choose your own adventure. Here's an example. This is a home that Donald Trump purchased in Palm Beach, Florida for just over $40 million in 2004. Less than 4 years later, a Russian oligarch paid him almost $100 million for that same house. Could Trump tax returns shed light on whether any reasonable outlay of expenses on Trump's part might explain why somebody would suddenly want to pay Donald Trump more than double what he paid for that property after only a few years at a time when housing prices in that area were dropping and not rising? I mean, if this isn't just some Russian oligarch dumping almost $60 million into Donald Trump's pocket for no discernible reason, couldn't Trump tax returns clear that up? Wouldn't Trump's taxes show whatever reasonable real estate inflow and outflow might explain what otherwise really does look like a bizarre dump of tens of millions of dollars of Russian money into Donald Trump's coffers? Right at a time when Donald Trump owed tens of millions of dollars to Deutsche Bank, and Deutsche Bank was breathing down his neck. That Russian oligarch who spent all that money on that property and then never moved into it and ultimately tore it down. He's also a large shareholder in a bank called the Bank of Cyprus, which has been implicated in Russian money laundering. The chairman of the Bank of Cyprus is the former CEO of Deutsche Bank, to which Donald Trump owed all that money at the time he conveniently got this very large influx of cash from a Russian guy. The vice chairman of that bank until recently was our new Secretary of Commerce, longtime Trump friend Wilbur Ross. Couldn't the tax returns sort this out for us? If there are inexplicable dumps of foreign money into the president's coffers that cannot be explained in normal business terms, that's potentially a huge problem for somebody who's serving as president of the United States, right? I mean, the interest in Trump's tax returns is not a picayune thing. It's not a partisan thing. If interests have inexplicably given him a lot of money in recent years, why did they do it? What do they want for that money now? Is the president in a position where we need to watch to make sure he is not paying off his past benefactors with our country's resources, with U.S. policy, with decisions that he can make as president? That's part of why we need to see his tax returns. And I raise this issue of this particular Russian oligarch, Dmitry Rybolovlev. I've been practicing. Rybolovlev. Dmitry Rybolovlev, the guy who paid Trump all that money for that house. I raise him only as an example because we haven't had any meaningful financial disclosures, any tax returns from the president. And because of that, this Russian oligarch is just one of the continuing sources of intrigue about whether our president now has foreign ties that could conceivably be motivating his actions as president. And I say it's ongoing concerns because it is ongoing concerns. It's not just interesting stuff that happened in his past that we have to worry about in the past. I mean, during the presidential campaign, Dmitry Rybolovlev's private plane was spotted at least twice at local airports when Donald Trump campaign events were happening nearby. At least once, his private plane was spotted on the tarmac right alongside Donald Trump's private plane while Donald Trump was doing a campaign event. Rybolovlev insists to us that that is a coincidence, but tonight the Palm Beach Post reports that this weekend, Rybolovlev's yacht was parked alongside the yacht that's owned by Robert Mercer, who is the single largest financial backer of the Trump for President effort, the single largest financial backer of Breitbart, and the person who basically installed both Kellyanne Conway and Steve Bannon at the top of the Trump campaign after Paul Manafort was fired for his ties to Russia and Ukraine. Dmitry Rybolovlev denies to us tonight that he has had anything to do with Robert Mercer or with Donald Trump, other than paying him almost $60 million over the price Trump paid for that one house. But once you're the president of the United States, the people of the United States need to know if you've significant unexplained sources of income, particularly of income that has a foreign origin. I mean, hence the need to see Trump's tax returns, hence the appetite for it. Has he received money from foreign sources? Has he received loans from foreign sources? One of the things you have to declare on your U.S. federal taxes is whether you have paid taxes in foreign countries. Does the president have foreign bank accounts? If so, which banks? The more I know about the Bank of Cyprus, for example, the more I want to know about whether there are other ties, other Trump ties to that troubled bank, aside from his hand-picked commerce secretary and the guy who inexplicably paid him all that money for that house, and the newly installed chairman from the bank that holds more of his debt than any other financial institution. When the Trump administration, when the president and his attorney general inexplicably moved on Friday to fire all of the U.S. attorneys, all of a sudden, on Friday, no warning, get out, you're done by midnight. The Preet Bharara firing in New York was of note and particular concern because President Trump and Attorney General Jeff Sessions had both previously told Preet Bharara he could continue to hold that job. It is a particularly newsworthy firing that they did an unexplained U-turn on that because of Bharara's jurisdiction. Bharara's office is pursuing a federal case against Deutsche Bank for Russian money laundering. That office also has jurisdiction, geographical jurisdiction, over Trump and the Trump Organization. Ethics watchdogs last week wrote to Preet Bharara asking him to investigate whether the president was receiving money from foreign governments through his business, through the Trump Organization. If he is receiving any income that originates with foreign governments, that would be unconstitutional. 2 days after receiving that letter from those ethics watchdog groups asking him to look into that possibility, Preet Bharara was told to resign. The day after that, after he refused to resign, he was fired. These are the reasons why people have wanted to see the president's tax returns. What is his relationship with Deutsche Bank? What is his relationship with foreign sources of income? Is he receiving any money through his business from foreign sources? Is he receiving any money through his business or through any of his real estate deals that can be traced back to foreign governments? I mean, his tax returns should show any income he has received from investment partnerships. This strange-shaped building was a Trump project in Azerbaijan, where the Trump Organization partnered with family members of a notoriously corrupt Azerbaijani government official, who also has had business ties to the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. The president's tax returns are of interest because if he has received income from foreign sources, as he did in that Azerbaijan deal, the origin of that income may have national security implications. If by any chance it follows those same contours back to the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, which is a sanctioned organization in this country because of its links to global terrorism. The unanswered questions around Michael Flynn, the fired former national security advisor. He last week retroactively registered as a foreign agent. He declared retroactively that he worked during the campaign and during the transition as lobbyist for the interests of the government of Turkey. We still do not understand why the Trump administration hired him to be national security advisor after they were advised that he was working for a foreign power. We still do not understand their caginess around Flynn and his firing. Why, for example, the White House said they fired Flynn because he lied to the vice president, but they didn't fire him until almost 3 weeks after they learned about those lies. We still have no idea why the vice president says he was completely unaware that Flynn was on the Turkish government payroll. Because he, as head of the transition, was repeatedly notified about it, including by Flynn's own lawyers. So why would he say now that he had no idea, he'd never heard of it until this past week? What explains the Trump administration's caginess around Michael Flynn, and specifically around Michael Flynn's financial ties to Turkey? Well, you know what? It would be helpful to see the tax returns. I mean, what kind of income has Trump Towers Istanbul provided to President Trump through his business? Is any of that income for the president from the Turkish government? Did Turkey have a financial relationship with the president? Do they continue to have a financial relationship with the president? Is there anything about the president's financial and business entanglements that is potentially driving presidential actions around the issue of Turkey, the unexplained questions and caginess that is explained around the issue of Michael Flynn and his firing? There are definitely personality-driven and petty reasons to seek the president's tax returns. Is he not as rich as he says he is? Is he not as charitable as he says he is? Was he in fact under audit when he was using that as an excuse to not release his tax returns? Was that worse than just a bad excuse? Was he really being audited? There's small reasons to be interested, right? But whether it's for small reasons or big reasons, there has been an unrelenting demand by people to see his tax returns. More than 1 million people have signed the White House petition demanding that he release his tax returns. In 19 states, legislation has now been filed that would actually keep him off the ballot in 2020 unless he releases his tax returns before the re-election campaign. On tax day this year, next month in Chicago, activists are raising money right now to fly a 16-foot inflatable chicken with Trump's hairdo over their tax day protest as a helium balloon. They're demanding that the president stop being so chicken about releasing his tax returns. Literally today in Missouri, these protesters were outside Senator Roy Blunt's office demanding that the president releases tax returns. That sign in the front there says, is your refund listed in US dollars or in rubles? There's a reason that people unrelentingly want to see his tax returns. There is a reason there are decades of precedent for presidents and presidential candidates all releasing them. There is genuine curiosity as to whether they will bear out what he has said about himself in terms of his income. Honestly, there's genuine concern as to whether he will pursue tax policies that are designed to personally benefit himself and his family, which we won't know about until we've seen his tax returns. There are also concerns just about bookkeeping. There's reasons for concern about whether in his FEC financial disclosure form, which is all we've got from him, there's reason for concern. There are indications in the paperwork that he may have given wildly inflated valuations of the worth of his golf course properties abroad. When you compare what he said in that FEC document versus the tax filings he made on those properties in the UK, where he declared them all as losing money. Incidentally, lying to the FEC is a crime for which you can go to prison for 5 years. But with all of that, the concerns about whether he's going to be self-dealing in his tax policies, concerns about whether he might have lied or misrepresented his own financial circumstance during the campaign, concerns about whether or not he might have misstated things to the FEC. With all of that, there looms over all of this the big national security worry, right? The big almost existential worry. The greater concern, the worry that this president may be financially beholden to an individual, to an institution, to a country. And now that he's president, we won't know if he tries to use the resources and power of our country to pay off that entity to whom he is beholden. We can't know any of that without getting his tax returns. That's why presidents release their tax returns. That's why there will continue to be unrelenting pressure to find Donald Trump's tax returns, to expose Donald Trump's tax returns. And that pressure will remain every single day that he remains as president. Unless and until he releases them, the pressure will never let up. And that's why somebody has decided to leak a portion of his 2005 tax return, which is how and why we got it tonight. And I am sure it is only the start, but it's a start. And our little piece of it, we just got it. We'll go through it next. is a copy of Donald Trump's tax returns. We have his federal tax return for 1 year for 2005. I believe this is the only set of the president's federal taxes that reporters have ever gotten a hold of. What we have are these 2 pages, front and back, from the same 1040 form that you might have filled out when you file your taxes. And in terms of what's on here, let me give you the basics. Aside from the numbers being large, these pages are straightforward. He paid $38 million, looks like $38 million in taxes. He took a big write-down of $103 million, more on that later. If you add up the lines for income, he made more than $150 million in that year. Mazel tov. We got these pages. We got this document today from a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist who's better on financial matters than almost anybody else in the business. His name is David K. Johnston. These pages turned up the other day in his mailbox. David will join us live here in just a moment. But because nobody has had the president's tax before, we didn't know what to expect. When we showed this 2005 return to the White House to ask them if it's real, we sent this over to the White House tonight, and the White House responded basically with, yep. I'm going to read you the White House statement on this tonight. Quote, before being elected president, Mr. Trump was one of the most successful businessmen in the world, with the responsibility to his company, his family, and his employees to pay no more tax than legally required. That being said, Mr. Trump paid $38 million, even after taking into account large-scale depreciation for construction on an income of more than $150 million, as well as paying tens of millions of dollars in other taxes, such as sales and excise taxes and employment taxes. And this illegally published return proves just that. Despite this substantial income figure and tax paid, it is totally illegal to steal and publish tax returns. The dishonest media can continue to make this part of the agenda, while the president will focus on his, which includes tax reform that will benefit all Americans. White House statement for tonight. For the record, the First Amendment gives us the right to publish this return. It is not illegally published, nor are we fake. Pinch me, I'm real. But good on the White House for acknowledging the return as proof of what the president made and paid that year. Here's the thing, though. A full tax return for someone like Donald Trump would be a lot longer than the 2 pages that we have here. There are all kinds of schedules and notes and attachments that could be involved, all containing information about the president and his money. Why will he not release his taxes, his full taxes, the way other presidents have done? Why not let the public see the information for themselves? We have obtained this, but this is all we've got. This tells us something, but he still has disclosed, certainly willingly disclosed, nothing compared to all other modern presidents. Joining us now is David K. Johnston. He's editor and founder of DCReport.org, which has posted this document as of a few minutes ago. He's also the author of The Making of Donald Trump and the Pulitzer Prize-winning financial reporter who found the president's 2005 tax returns in his mailbox. David, thank you for being here.
Delighted.
First of all, congratulations on this scoop. What can you tell us about how you got these pages, how you got this document?
Came in the mail over the transom, and there is absolutely nothing improper about journalists, if you haven't solicited something, getting it over the transom. And by the way, let me point out, it's entirely possible that Donald sent this to me. Donald Trump has, over the years, leaked all sorts of things. The very sleazy girl-on-girl pictures of the First Lady in the New York Post may have come from Donald. The front pages of the state tax returns that we had that were sent to the New York Times and the New York Daily News last fall may have come from Donald. Donald has a long history of leaking material about himself when he thinks it's in his interests.
Do we have reason to believe that those documents that you just described there were leaked by him, or is it just a possibility?
It's a possibility, and it could have been leaked by someone in his direction. But with Donald, you know, you never know. Donald creates his own reality, and he says things that aren't true. He says things and then denies he said them. He lives in this world that isn't the world of where you and I live, of verifiable facts. So yes, I think I have to include that in the list of possibilities of where it came from.
When you look at this document, when you look at these numbers, obviously we don't have the supporting schedules and sort of appendices that you get in big tax returns. Do these numbers seem right to you? Obviously, the White House statement to us is reiterating the $150 million income number and the $38 million paid number. Those numbers seem right to you?
Yes, and they fit the things we know from other public records about how Donald does business. For example, the dividends that he gets are primarily not what are called qualified dividends. That suggests they come from not big companies like ExxonMobil, but privately held enterprises. They show almost no tax-exempt interest, about $49,000. That would imply at the time maybe $900,000 of municipal bonds. Not much. I mean, there are lots of college professors out there my age who have $900,000 in municipal bonds. What's most important about this tax return, though, Rachel, is that under the regular tax system, remember we have two tax systems, well-to-do people, you and I, effectively calculate our tax twice, the regular tax system and the alternative minimum tax. If we didn't have the alternative minimum tax, and Donald Trump in writing wants to end the alternative minimum tax, he would have paid taxes at a lower rate than the bottom half of taxpayers, the poor in this country who make less than $33,000. Now think about that, on $153 million almost of income, he would have paid a little over $5 million, less than 3.5%, less than the half of taxpayers who make under $33,000. As it is, because of the alternative minimum tax, he paid $36.5 million, not the 38 the White House statement says. They're counting his self-employment tax, which is payroll taxes. $36.5 million, he paid 24%. You know who pays 24% in this country? Married couples with two incomes like my wife and I who make about $400,000 a year. Donald Trump and his wife that year made $418,000 a day. And the point of this is the top in this country, people at the top, are not burdened the way we suggest. I was in
let me stop you and let me restate some of that back to you, because you're a tax expert, and those of us who just pay taxes and aren't experts in them, I want to say it back to you and you tell me if I'm getting it right. If there weren't something called the alternative minimum tax, you can tell from this 1040, from these 2 pages from his tax return in 2005, if there weren't an alternative minimum tax, he'd be paying what percent?
It's right on line 44. He would have paid $5.3 million, which is 24% of his $152.7 million of positive income. And that's in large part because he was able to say he had negative income of $103 million.
Okay. So because there is an alternative minimum tax.
They disregarded most of the negative income.
Yeah.
He had to pay taxes, he had to pay more in taxes, but he still got a benefit. You know why? Because at the top, people are supposed to be paying 35% that year, 39.6% this year. But if you're in the alternative minimum tax, you only pay 28%.
Okay. That's
a 20% discount on your taxes. Would you like to get a 20% discount on your taxes? That's what Donald Trump got here.
So the issue that, I mean, I tried to lay out at the top of the show reasons why people are so interested in his tax returns. The White House has made this issue and saying it's only reporters who care. People don't care. This was litigated in the election when he didn't release his tax returns and people voted for him anyway. There are a number of reasons to be interested in his tax returns, and I think a number of reasons why people continue to be.
And most importantly, what we don't have here, which is this describes the types of income, but not the sources.
Okay, so
that's what we need to know. Who is the president getting money from?
Well, we need to know, A, sources of his income, whether or not he's beholden to somebody. We also need to know whether all the things he said about himself and his wealth and his charitableness and all those things are true. But we also need to know if he is going to take actions as president in terms of tax policy that are going to benefit him. And you're saying,
benefit his benefactors.
Yes.
Yes, I mean, it's a very complicated, tangled issue. I mean, here's a simple question to ask. Every other president's released their returns. We have Hillary Clinton's and Bill Clinton's returns back to the 1970s. Why is it that Donald Trump is so insistent that we're not to see his tax returns? There must be something hiding in his returns. You know, I've been at this for 50 years. I started as a teenager doing investigative reporting. And every time some high-level politician wants to hide something, it always turns out there's a reason. They've got something to hide. I have lots of things we can think of that Donald Trump has to hide. Including sources of income and his connections to the Russian oligarchs, who are essentially, Rachel, a state-sponsored network of international criminals. And you got to think about it in that way and understand that's their position in the world. And Donald Trump really is desperate that we don't see where his money comes from. And this is a man who we know was very deeply involved with one of the biggest drug kingpins in America in the 1980s. He risked his casino license just to show his loyalty to that man. He did business with the biggest mobsters in New York. For years, he traveled with the son of the head of the reputed Russian mob boss, himself a twice convicted felon. He says, I wouldn't know if he was in the room, even though they were together all the time, traveling. And many other criminals he has associated with throughout his life. So it's particularly relevant for us to say, where'd you get the money?
David K. Johnston is the editor and founder of DCReport.org. He is the one who obtained this Donald Trump tax return 2005. David, can you stay with us for a moment?
Sure.
We're going to bring my colleague Chris Hayes into this discussion, and I want to get back to this issue about the sources of Trump's money and also the source of this document tonight. We have published this 2005 tax return from the president on maddowblog.com. We've also linked to David K. Johnston's extensive reporting on this on DCReport.org. David's back with us in a moment. Stay with us. This is Republican Congressman Steve Knight. Mr. Knight has represented California's 25th district since 2015. Here's Congressman Knight addressing his constituents at a town hall just over a week ago.
I believe that President Trump should release his taxes.
I believe that President Trump should release his tax returns. Crowd goes wild. You can see Congressman Knight's constituents very happy with that answer. Americans overwhelmingly tell pollsters now that President Trump should release his tax returns. I should mention, though, 3 days after Congressman Steve Knight said that to his constituents at that town hall in his home district, 3 days after that, he voted against forcing Donald Trump to release his taxes. Congressman Knight was one of 226 House Republicans who voted in favor of keeping Trump's taxes under wraps. The only Republican to vote in favor of the public seeing Donald Trump's tax records is this guy, Senator Jones of North Carolina. He's the only one, the only Republican. For what it's worth, Congressman Mark Sanford of South Carolina, he had the courage to vote present on that vote. Courage. Over in the Senate, there have been Democratic attempts to get President Trump's tax returns released through a vote in the Senate, but Republicans have blocked those from even coming up for a vote. Bottom line, though, tonight, we've got them. At least we've got 2 pages of them from an anonymous source through David K. Johnston of bcreport.org. David joins us again now, along with my friend Chris Hayes, host of All In. Thank you both for being here. David, let me ask you, in terms of what you were just describing a moment ago about the most important thing we could learn from President Trump's tax returns, the sources of some of his income over the years. Obviously, this 1040 leaked to you. We've had a few other individual pages of state tax returns that have been sent to the New York Times. You reviewed some of that for your earlier reporting on Donald Trump, some taxes from the 70s. What would we actually have to see? What would we hope to get in the mail if we were going to get to the real meat of Donald Trump's potential foreign financial ties?
Well, you want to see the sources of income, which will be shown in his business returns. He has over 500 business entities. You want to know who the partners are in those entities and what they show about the income. You also, by the way, want to show the interest he's paying and the fees he's paying to other people to know who he's paying. I mean, we've talked about this in terms of, I have in terms of the income he's taking in, but what about people he's paying?
Right, and you only pay interest to people to whom you owe money.
You owe money, and by the way,
who's
one of the biggest places he owes money to? The Communist government of China's Bank of China, which is also the biggest single tenant in Trump Tower. I mean, I grew up in the Cold War. The thought that Republicans would defend a president who has been involved for 30 years with the Russians, not Russia, Russians, who are around Putin and would be borrowing money from Beijing.
All of which we knew before we got this tax return. Chris Hayes, looking at this and just considering the scope of this, what's your reaction?
So 2 things come to mind. One is that actually, right, disclosure, there's this idea that like they have something to hide because they're acting like they're having something to hide. Their taxes. It's possible disclosure could benefit them in this one way, right? There was speculation after we got the state taxes in '95 from the New York Times that the magnitude of the write-down could have prevented paying taxes for 18 years.
Okay, slow down. Explain that for a second.
So the 1995 taxes showed an enormous loss. That loss was able to be carried forward year after year.
He took almost $1 billion as a real estate loss.
That's and a loss that he shouldn't have been able to take because it was the loss of the banks. He bought a tax shelter. Republicans in Congress, as soon as they learned about it shut down. So there was double deduction of that, and he got the benefit, as did the banks, of the tax.
But by taking that $900 million, that set him up to essentially stack that up against any income tax he might have to pay anytime for the next 18 years, and it would cancel out any income tax he had to pay.
Again, there was speculation he had paid nothing for 8 years. Well, we have this.
He paid something.
Well, he encouraged that speculation. When Hillary Clinton said, you know, you're not paying taxes, he said, because I'm smart. So which is it? You really did pay a lot of taxes and you're tricking us, or you're not paying taxes?
Well, now we know he did pay over 20% taxes here.
That's right.
We should also note that this is a man who has a fortune. The U.S. has never elected someone from directly from private office and these kind of business dealings, and who would stand to benefit or lose from changes to the tax code that he himself is pushing. For instance, the current plan that is being floated, it would eliminate the alternative minimum tax, which is responsible for him paying a whopping amount of money.
Most of the tax.
So that's another reason for disclosure. And the third thing I think that I keep coming to is they are going to April 15th is coming up. We're all going to file our taxes, or some people are going to file extensions. I presume the White House will file an extension, and the reason I think they'll file an extension is because they cannot use the audit argument with the taxes they're filing now. I can guarantee you 1 year of Donald Trump's taxes that are not under audit. They are the ones that he would file this year. They cannot be under audit.
Oh, the ones he filed last year are under audit.
Right. So that argument gets thinner and thinner and thinner, and he is now reaching the front. He is now reaching the frontier where it no longer is applicable.
The story here to me is A, that we have obtained this, B, that this stuff is obtainable.
Yes.
There has been a lot of interesting reporting recently on how if you work at the IRS, it is not likely that you would be able to see a return for somebody who you weren't involved with.
The president's tax returns are put in a special vault in the commissioner's office.
Really?
And if you work at the IRS and call up Rachel Maddow's tax returns, an inspector will be at your desk like this. You know, we've seen the CIA hacked. I'll be very shocked if we ever see the IRS hacked.
And with that, knowing the security with which these things are treated, Donald Trump has been an adult in filing taxes for a very long time. And, you know, when you file for a mortgage, when you file to apply to lots of different things, you have to show lots of tax returns.
You're supposed to.
Versions of his tax returns have ended up all sorts of places, whether it's in casino license applications, personal applications of any kind. And for some reason, somebody who had access to this one wanted it to be known. I believe this will not be the end of that. Sit right there. We'll be right back. Again, tonight we have posted Donald Trump's 2005 federal tax return. David K. Johnston at DCReport.org is the man who obtained this. He stays with us, as does Chris Hayes. We're going to be joined by Michael Beschloss in a moment to talk about the historically unprecedented nature of this. Stay with us. So we have obtained Donald Trump's tax returns tonight. His 1040 from the year 2005, the first time his federal tax returns have been made public, have been obtained by any news organization since he is a presidential candidate, let alone since he was president. They were obtained by investigative reporter David K. Johnston and his reporting shop, dcreport.org. These tax returns raise very interesting questions about how much the president's own proposed tax policies would improve his own personal bottom line. But they raise even more questions about what we haven't yet seen. Trump is the first president since the Watergate era to refuse to release his taxes of his own accord, which makes this release, who knows where it came from, both an interesting news development and potentially a historic one. Joining us now, bringing into the conversation now, NBC News presidential historian Michael Beschloss. Michael, thank you for coming on the show tonight on short notice. We really appreciate you being with us.
Oh, thanks, Rachel. Nice to talk.
So I tried to sum up a little bit of why the release of presidential tax returns has become such a mainstay of our politics. Why did it start with Nixon? Why has it stayed important since then?
Well, in the time of Watergate, Richard Nixon got into big trouble because it emerged that he had backdated the gift of his vice presidential papers and taken a deduction for that, which was illegal. There were a lot of other things happening at Watergate, but that was one of them. And the result was that people said, gee, it must be pretty important that in the future we looked at presidential tax returns. And as you've said, since the time of Jimmy Carter, a single president has released his tax returns every single year, and there's a reason for that. You know, the reason is so that you don't have a lot of mystery about possible sources and possible conflicts of interest. In Donald Trump's case, it makes you really wonder whether it really is worth it to him to have not released his tax returns, given the kind of mystery that we're seeing culminate tonight in a lot of interest in these tax returns that you've got.
Michael, one of the issues that Trump himself has raised when he has been repeatedly asked about his tax returns, number one, he said that people don't care about it, only reporters care about it. That's not borne out by the polling data and indeed by the persistent activism around this issue. The other issue that he's raised is, yeah, it's been a tradition since Nixon, but it wasn't before then. And I want to go back to what it was like before Nixon. Was there actually controversy around presidential taxes, around questions of self-dealing and presidential financial disclosure before Nixon that we should see as materially informing these kinds of decisions tonight?
Not in modern times. You had something like Warren Harding at the time of the Teapot Dome scandal, when not the president, but people around him were wheeling and dealing, and some of them got into very big legal trouble over that. But in Donald Trump's case, you know, we've got something unusual, which is, as you and I have said many times before, first president who never had military experience or government experience. So this is someone whose career, at least in recent years, has been more opaque than it would be if you had someone who was in public service. The other thing that's really interesting is that we've got a House Intelligence Committee investigation with hearings that are going to be opening extremely soon, so the timing of this is interesting as well.
NBC News presidential historian Michael Beschloss joining us on short notice tonight. Michael, as always, thank you for your time. Really good to have you with us.
Thank you, Rachel. Awfully interesting.
Super interesting. Chris Hayes, to that last point about the House Intelligence Committee and the Senate Intelligence Committee looking into potential Russia ties, obviously the big unanswered question in those potential investigations is, did the Trump campaign collude? Right. Did they go along with it? Did they know that Russia was doing what they were doing and help them? Was it with their support? And is there any continuing relationship between Donald Trump and the Russian government that's one of debt or being beholden or anything? David K. Johnson.
Tomorrow, I hope we'll be back up.
DCReport.org, set a bookmark. You can also see this document tonight at maddowblog.com. My friend Chris Hayes, thank you. We crashed our own website too? Oh, we crashed our own website too. Come back, set a bookmark. We'll be right back.
After we played hardball, gone all in, heard from Rachel, and had the last word, it's time for the 11th hour with Brian Williams. A fast-paced look at the day that was and what it means for tomorrow. The 11th hour with Brian Williams, weeknights at 11 on MSNBC.
Again tonight, we are breaking news. We have published Donald Trump's tax returns from 2005. It's 2 pages, his 1040 form from his federal tax returns that year. Joining us now is NBC News White House correspondent Hallie Jackson. Hallie, it's great to have you with us. I know you're only able to join us by phone. I want to talk with you about the White House reaction to this news tonight and how hard they have fought to stop something like this from seeing the light of day.
Well, what I can tell you is this, Rachel. You had the statement, I believe, earlier on the show from the White House about this, confirming some of the numbers that are in that tax return. I can speak to what the president, as a candidate, had been pressed on repeatedly on the campaign trail, again during his transition, and then his team has been asked about this as well after the inauguration, which is, when will the president release his tax returns? Is that going to happen? You know, there's a line from the president has consistently been, as a candidate, that he will not release his returns because he is under audit. You might remember that shortly after the inauguration, Kellyanne Conway seemed to say that the president would not be releasing his returns at all because people didn't care. And then later on Twitter indicated that, in fact, it was because of the audit. The president himself was asked about this. We actually asked him about it at his first press conference during the transition. It was in January, about whether he would release it. Why wouldn't he? He said, Americans don't care. You've talked about the poll numbers about it. We actually asked Sean Spicer about it again just last week, the press secretary, about whether the president is still under audit and will he commit to releasing his 2016 tax returns when those are completed. The press secretary said that, as far as he knows, the president is still under audit, that nothing has changed. He said he would follow up on the question about whether the president would release the 2016 returns. And I am told by a White House official today that they have not made an announcement on that just yet. So still questions obviously remain about this, but the president as a candidate was consistent about his reasoning, and we see no change as of yet from the White House, Rachel.
White House correspondent Hallie Jackson joining us tonight from Washington. Hallie, thank you very much. So this was a little bit of a crazy night. But tonight, thanks to investigative journalist David K. Johnston, the world is getting its first look at a federal tax return from Donald Trump. Again, this is his two-page Form 1040 from the year 2005. Incidentally, just as a matter of trivia, this is the year that he got married to his current wife, to Melania Naus at the time. And she's listed on here. It's a joint filing for the two of them. And you can see some real stuff here. You can see, for example, that the president reported more than $150 million in income that year. David K. Johnston got this tax return in his mailbox. He tells it it came across the transom. The White House tonight confirmed to us that this return is real. They threatened us and told us that it was illegal for us to publish it. It is not illegal for us to publish it, but we'll take the threat in the spirit with which it was intended. Watch the questions that this revelation tonight brings forward. If somebody was able to release this report, this 1040 report, and get it into reporters' hands, I think it is reasonable to expect that there's more out there and that we will see more of this come out. We know how much the president made and paid in that 1 year. We have only these 2 pages. But there's still a long list of questions that could be answered by the president if he wanted to release more, or if anybody else does what this source did tonight to get this into our hands. Thanks very much for being with us tonight. That does it for us tonight. We will see you again tomorrow. Now it's time for the last word with Lawrence O'Donnell. Good evening, Lawrence.
Rachel, you know, normally at 9 p.m. I have some stuff to do to prepare for a 10 p.m. live TV show. All that stuff I made sure was done at 8:59 p.m. I got to watch every minute tonight. This has been riveting television. This has been an amazing revelation. And I just want to point out that you and I have mailboxes too. David K. Johnston just got lucky in his mailbox one day.
www.sendittorachel.com exists. I'm just saying.
But this goes to your point about why this may just be the tip of an iceberg of material that could be discovered that way. If this was discovered that way, what else do people have out there that they might just want to send to people's mailboxes?
That's right. And this, you know, what we've got here highlights how important a president's tax returns can be. It highlights the important questions that could be answered about this president by his tax return. I think it only increases the pressure to see, you know, the assorted schedules that go with this and further years.
All right, who are we kidding? You're not finished with this. Come on over here, across the hall. Let's do a few more minutes on this.
I'll be there in a second.
You've got more to say, I know it.
Okay, I'll be right there.
Thank you, Rachel. We're going to continue our breaking news coverage of the tax documents that recently arrived in David K. Johnston's mailbox. That's how we know this. That's how David K. Johnston got it. This information reveals the president's basic tax information, the summary information of his 2005 return. And revealing tax returns like this is something that all presidential candidates and presidents normally do. They normally just release this. This is not breaking news for any other presidential candidate or any other president. It has become a White House ritual for the president and the vice president to release their tax returns in the first or second week of April as April 15th approaches. The tradition is for the president to always release his tax returns before tax day, before April 15th, showing exactly how much he is paying on how much tax he's paying on exactly how much income he is earning. Normally, these are, like the Trump documents, filed jointly with the First Lady. And we see that every year with the president and the vice president. And we see that the president and vice president pay their taxes on time. They're encouraging us to do the same thing. This year, we may see the peculiar spectacle of the vice president maintaining that tradition, the vice president only, while the president continues to refuse to release any tax information. Now, here's what Donald Trump, the candidate, had to say about releasing his tax returns.
I pay hundreds of millions of dollars in taxes, but as soon as my routine audit's finished, I'll release my returns. I'll be very proud to.
Thank you, Mr. Trump.
I'm under a routine audit, and it'll be released, and as soon as the audit's finished, it'll be released. I'll release them when the audit's completed. Nobody would release when it's under
a routine audit. From the first emergence of the audit excuse, we have pointed out on this program that there is absolutely no proof, never has been proof, that any of Donald Trump's relevant tax returns are being audited. Audits begin with a form letter from the IRS that commences the audit. Donald Trump has never produced that letter. I have requested that letter from the Trump campaign. They have never produced that letter. If he was actually being audited, he would have that letter, and it wouldn't tell us very much at all except that he was being audited. But still, even that letter would not prove that Donald Trump was still being audited. It would only prove that an audit was commenced on a certain date and that that audit might or might not still be going on. There is no reason to believe that Donald Trump is being audited if he will not even release the form letter that commences an IRS audit. Now, you just heard Donald Trump say that he pays hundreds of millions of dollars in taxes. That's really important. Let's listen to that one more time.
I pay hundreds of millions of dollars in taxes.
The tax information revealed about Donald Trump tonight shows nothing like that. Joining us now with the facts, David K. Johnston, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist who founded DCReport.org, a nonprofit news organization covering the Trump administration specifically. Also with us, Rachel Maddow, host of The Rachel Maddow Show, which blew up Twitter and the internet tonight. You tweeted out around 8-ish or something that you had this. And the anticipation built by the second on what we had. And the only previous information we had from Donald Trump about how much he pays in taxes, is what we just heard. Hundreds of millions of dollars he pays in taxes, and you find, and we're able to reveal to everyone tonight, that it's about 38 million on this particular year.
And we don't know what this indicates about other years. I mean, one of the things that David's been able to document over the years is he found when he was looking into Trump's casino businesses, for example, there were a number of years in the 70s for which Trump paid no taxes.
Negative income. They had negative income. Paid no tax.
And so 1 year into the next year, you know, you have to watch things like big losses that he takes over a number of years. This year, in this filing that we've just been able to publish tonight, this first federal tax return of Donald Trump's that's ever been made public, you see him carrying over $100 million of a previous year's loss. That explains a lot about how he's been able to minimize his tax burden over the years. But honestly, this raises more questions than it answers.
David, the New York Times obtained 1995 tax information in a very similar way, an envelope that just showed up. This is our only 21st century information. On that $100 million loss that's on here, there's nothing we see in these pages that identifies what that $103 million loss is.
No, I mean, the first reasonable thing to assume is that of the $918 million tax shelter Donald bought, where he took what should have been $900 million of income, and magically converted it into a tax loss under a deal Republicans shut down the minute they heard about it, but let him keep his deal, and him and others. If this is the residue of it, then that means he was able to write off an average of $81.5 million a year for the previous 10 years. It's $815 million gone. Now, the White House statement tonight suggests that there's also additional new tax losses in there So perhaps his income was higher than $81.5 million a year on average in the previous decade. And by the way, it isn't $38 million. The White House says $38 million. That includes his self-employment payroll tax, most of which is Medicare. His income tax is $36.5 million. A lot of money, but let's stick to the right number.
Let's go to the White House statement here. This is the White House response that they put out just before your broadcast, Rachel, saying, before being elected president, Mr. Trump was one of the most successful businessmen in the world with a responsibility to his company, his family, and his employees to pay no more tax than legally required. That being said, Mr. Trump paid $38 million, even after taking into account large-scale depreciation for construction on an income of more than $150 million, as well as paying tens of millions of dollars in other taxes, such as sales and excise taxes and employment. Now, you know, I couldn't keep a straight face on that part.
He pays taxes every time he buys milk duds.
Yeah, so he pays the gasoline sales tax too, just like, okay. So no one mentions that when they're talking
He doesn't have to pay jet fuel tax anymore because the taxpayers are providing him with a jet now.
All right, so his statement cracks up. So after he gets through that about paying sales, excise taxes, and employment taxes, and this illegally published return proves just that. Despite this substantial income figure and tax paid, it is totally illegal to steal and publish tax returns. The dishonest media can continue to make this part of their agenda while the president will focus on his, which includes tax reform that will benefit all Americans. Now, one of the things that Donald Trump knows and has been hiding behind is he knows that it is illegal, it is a crime for the IRS to reveal anything about his tax information, including a crime for them to reveal that he's even being audited. So he's been able to say, I'm being audited and I pay hundreds of millions of dollars in taxes, knowing that the people who have those returns at the IRS can never say anything publicly. The other people who are bound are accountants who have worked for Trump. There is a privilege there that they cannot violate. But David, you got this in your mailbox. Right. I didn't hear you say you stole it. Donald Trump is saying you stole this.
There's nothing illegal about this, and I frankly am disappointed that John Spicer, in the statement that I'm sure he wrote or Donald personally approved, was so dishonest in their own statement. There is nothing illegal about publishing stuff. Journalists can receive any information that they didn't solicit. If I go to somebody and say, hey, give me the tax return you've got at his accounting firm, and then I publish it, that's a different story. I didn't do that. I got this over the transom at my home. And the suggestion that it's illegal to publish, nonsense. And no judge anywhere would say that. But remember, to Donald Trump, he lives in a world where if a judge disagrees with him, bad judge. If a Congress doesn't do what he wants, bad Congress people. Because Donald sees himself and talks about the presidency as if he is a dictator, because that's what he was in the Trump organization.
Can I just say on that point that, first of all, it's not illegal to publish these things. Calling the dishonest media, calling out the dishonest media in this statement, there's nothing dishonest about this story. There's nothing dishonest about this publication, nor have they even accused us of that. I would say, listen, we are all, as journalists, on the lookout for forged documents, right? We're all on the lookout for somebody trying to sucker us into something. When we got this, when David got this and said that we could put this on television, that he had obtained this, you sent it to the White House, we sent it to the White House, we said, verify this for us, let us know if it's true. They didn't come back to us and say it's not true. They verified the terms of it. They verified the income, they verified the tax paid. They're essentially verifying the document, but then calling us dishonest at the same time. Had this been a fake document, nobody would have published it. We went to them for verification, they gave it to us, they published it, and then insulted us as dishonest for doing so. And that's, I mean, I realize we're getting used to this from the White House, but that's not at all in keeping with the facts of the way this was brought to the public's attention.
One thing they didn't say is, this is dishonest. He pays hundreds of millions of dollars in taxes. They didn't argue with any of the numbers here. They actually adopted them in their statement, indicating as much as you could ask for in terms of this being the real thing.
Can we go to one other thing on the audits issue? So Trump has said, as you pointed out, I'm being audited and that's why I can't release my taxes. David, one of the things you've pointed out is that even if that were true, that you couldn't release tax returns while you're under audit, not true, you can. The IRS makes clear that you can. The example of Nixon makes clear that you can. Even if we decided that you couldn't release tax returns that are currently under audit, isn't it basically impossible that Donald Trump's tax returns from the 1970s and the 1980s and the 1990s and the early 2000s are all still under audit?
No, in fact,
It's a 6-year statute of limitations.
Well, but tax fraud is like murder. There's no statute of limitations on tax fraud. But Trump's lawyers, in one of the most artfully written legal letters I have ever read in my life, said that he is under audit only from 2009 forward.
But they never used the word audit.
That's correct. They never used it, but that was what they wanted us to imply.
Yeah, they wanted
so I think we can reasonably assume 2008 and earlier, absolutely there's no audit.
Right.
Well, I would love to see that from 2008. That's when he was getting that $95 million for that house.
When you submit your tax return, you sign what's called a jurat. It is under penalty of perjury. I say everything in this return is true to the best of my ability. So releasing the audit doesn't have anything to do with it. You've already made your declaration under oath.
That it's real and true.
So either we have a president who violates his oath and is concerned about what we'll find out, or he has sources of income or obligations to people that bring into question his integrity and his loyalty. And I'm very frankly, having covered Donald for almost 30 years, very concerned about both of those. Or we have just an absolute contempt for the democratic process in the White House. I don't see any other option here.
The notion that if we got the rest of this, and this return, by the way, could have hundreds of
500 to 1,500 pages easily.
Yeah, to back up all the things that are in here. We still might not necessarily know real sources of income, since much of his income, if not all of it, passes through companies that he owns.
Right.
And that company can then pass it to another company that he owns. And what shows up in terms of the origin inside here somewhere, 200 pages down there, might not be the actual.
We'd have a much better roadmap, but we might not necessarily have a full picture. Absolutely.
And one of the straightforward lines here that's kind of interesting is number 7, where he talks about he has wages and salary income, which is unusual for someone in his case. It's about $1 million, and you know,
it could be hers. His wife was a model.
She's on here, but she was never at that league of that business. But that could be his television income could have been paid that way. But even that, most of that is paid through personal corporations of the performers. So that's the only one where if you actually saw the documentation for that would be real. You would see a real source of that income.
Well, as executive producer of his show, he may have gotten both a salary and a profit share in the program, but we don't know what that was for.
Right. Can you stay if we do a little commercial here? David, I'm going to need you. Eventually I want to go line by line.
That's a great line. I'm glad to hear that.
I can't resist this. This is amazing stuff. Stay with us. We're going to be right back with more of this continuing breaking news coverage of the new tax documents revealed tonight on Rachel's show. Documents David K. Johnston received in his mailbox. That's the breaking news tonight. We'll be right back.
We played hardball, gone all in, heard from Rachel, and had the last word. It's time for the 11th hour with Brian Williams. A fast-paced look at the day that was and what it means for tomorrow. The 11th hour with Brian Williams, weeknights at 11 on MSNBC.
Donald Trump Jr. has now just responded to the news that Rachel Maddow broke on her show tonight, that produced by the tax information obtained by David K. Johnston, tax information that arrived in his mailbox. We'll hear what Donald Trump Jr. had to say next.
Will you release your tax returns to prove what you're saying about no deals in Russia?
Well, I'm not releasing the tax returns because, as you know, they're under audit.
But every president since the 70s has
Oh,
had
gee,
a
I've
required
never heard
audit
that.
from the IRS.
Gee,
The
I've
last
never
6
heard
that released them. But as
I've never heard that.
sir,
You know, the only one that cares about my tax returns are the reporters. Okay,
You
they're
don't
the
think
only
the
ones.
American public is concerned
But no,
about
I don't think so. I won.
Do you believe
I mean, I
that?
became president.
That was President-elect Donald Trump's press conference in January in New York. We're back with Rachel Maddow, David K. Johnston, who broke this story tonight about these 2 pages of the top 2 pages, the summary pages of Donald Trump's 2005 personal federal income tax return filed jointly with his wife, Melania. And Donald Trump, Rachel, we just heard him say, no one cares about this. Except Rachel Maddow and David K. Johnston. No one cares about it. An ABC News Washington Post poll says 74% say that he should release his tax returns.
74% of Americans?
74% of Americans, who he says don't care about it. 18% say should not. 8% no opinion. But 74% want to see the information that you presented tonight. And as I said at the break there, Donald Trump Jr. has responded, and he has tweeted saying, "Thank you, Rachel Maddow, for providing to your Trump-hating followers how successful Donald Trump is, and that he paid $40 million in taxes." Of course, Donald Jr. forgets that his father said he pays hundreds of millions in taxes.
I think there are very few people, even among Trump haters in the world, for whom what they hate about him is they think he's not really successful. Right? I don't think that's whether or not it's there's hate involved here at all. The idea that Trump will somehow prove his detractors correct by proving to be wealthy, I think, is a fantasy. And honestly, there's a reason that more than 70% of the country wants to see these tax returns, and it's not out of a belief that you'll catch Donald Trump in something, having been self-aggrandizing about his wealth or whatever. I think the reason people want to see these things is because they're worried that their president may be acting with divided loyalties.
Yes.
And we've never, ever had to worry about that with an American president before. We really haven't. In the 1700s, the 1800s, the 1900s, and in this century, we have never had material cause to worry about that. And we do with this one. And this is the one who won't let us see his finances. And that's the problem. And if you want to make it about me, and you want to make it about hatred, and you want to make it about the petty concerns here, go for it. But you're missing the point, and the American people are not.
Well, in your introduction of this subject tonight, you took us on a tour of the possibilities of divided loyalties in this administration, General Michael Flynn, the entire story as to why these returns, this president's returns, are the most important in history, because we need to know what his financial dependence might be in Russia and elsewhere.
There are a number of financial ties that he has, business partnerships that he has, that already raise concerns. And I only did some of them. We didn't talk about, Indonesia. We didn't talk about any of the South American stuff.
That's why you're here now.
Trump
you
Soho.
have the time.
We have this. But I mean, even if you just look at Azerbaijan, which was the focus of a long New Yorker piece recently, that it's really easy to absorb. The Trump family, the Trump organization, had a partnership there with the family of a notoriously corrupt Azerbaijani government official, and that's how they did their Trump property project in Azerbaijan. It made no sense on a lot of financial grounds, but the people who they were partnered with have also partnered with the Iranian Revolutionary Guard and are fundamentally, profoundly, flagrantly corrupt. And on one hand, there's a criminality issue because it's illegal under the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act to take income from corrupt sources, to take income, to be involved in business partnership where bribes are being paid, etc. On the other hand, there's something bigger in terms of American national security, which is the president, if he is financially linked, if he received money that originated with the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, we have a problem on criminal grounds, we have a problem on national security grounds, and we have a problem in terms of leverage. Because if either of those things are true, his potential susceptibility to blackmail on that subject is mind-blowing in terms of what it means for our country, alone and in the world. And that's why you want to see this president's tax returns. It's not because of some vanity about how rich he is. It's because of our country, our security, and whether or not we need to worry about whether this country is being led by somebody who doesn't have this country's interests first at heart.
And let me just, David, the other thing you could get out of this is there's some public information. Right. Rachel has talked a couple of times about this Russian oligarch who paid Donald Trump double for a house in a real estate market.
As we reported at DC Report.
Sure, in a real estate market where values were going down at the time. Okay. We would love to see in tax filings how that gain was treated.
That's right.
We would love to be able to see, is it the amount that was publicly reported on it? Is it some smaller amount? Why would it be a smaller amount? And all of that lives inside these documents.
Right. If the deal, by the way, for the Florida land, which I was down yesterday inspecting it in Palm Beach, had been done by a city councilman, I assure you there would have been a huge news coverage. This is some kind of a payoff because it makes no economic sense whatsoever.
Right.
But if I can, I want to go to the
meaning
tweet,
you overpay the politicians for real estate instead of giving them a bag of cash.
If you're trying to hide money from your wife, you don't overpay a piece of land way beyond what it's worth. That makes no sense at all, and that's the cover story. Donald Trump Jr.'s tweet. I don't hate Donald Trump. I find him endlessly fascinating. That's why I've paid attention to him for 30 years. Donald Trump is now chosen to run for public office. If Donald Trump Jr. had paid attention in 8th grade civics, he would know that all of us at this table and many other people, it is our duty to tell the truth about our elected leaders. It has nothing to do with hatred. By his standard, the homicide detective who hunts down the killer hates the killer. Well, Jigsaw John, the famous homicide detective, once said to me, I don't care who the killer is. All I care about is the person that I catch is the killer. Yeah, that's the issue.
Rachel, what are you hoping for in the next chapter of this coverage?
That's a good question. I think that we should focus in part on the fact that this document somehow made its way to David. Mm-hmm. Not in the sense that we need to ferret out the source, but we should know that if the Trump administration and the credibility of this president is predicated in part on these documents staying invisible, well, this one isn't invisible anymore. Mm-hmm. And I don't think there's any reason to believe that we should expect that this will be the only Trump tax document that ever comes to light. If the president wants the American people to believe him in terms of what he said about his finances and his entanglements or lack thereof, then he better hope that his tax documents back him up on that, because this isn't going to be the last one that comes out. And the more we learn about this, the closer we're going to get to the truth about whether or not his foreign entanglements explain more about what just happened in our election.
The immediate important governing issue that this raises is in the Trump tax legislation that's coming up. How does he benefit in that legislation based on what we see here? We're going to pick that up, David, after the break. Rachel, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Thank you for staying late. I knew you had a few more things to say about this.
You can always do.
And really, just a great hour. Thank you very much, Rachel. Appreciate it. We're going to be right back with David K. Johnston and more detail on what we have discovered in these summary pages of Donald Trump's 2005 tax return.
played hardball, gone all in, heard from Rachel, and had the last word. It's time.
We're back with our breaking news coverage tonight, begun in the last hour on Rachel Maddow's show when she revealed summary pages of Donald Trump's 2005 federal income tax return. David K. Johnston is also still with us. He had those documents delivered to him. He has no idea where they came from. They ended up in his mailbox. He was able to provide them to Rachel tonight and to us. He's been with both of the shows tonight explaining what's in these. The DNC has issued a statement now in response to what has been revealed tonight on MSNBC. They say the White House's willingness to release some tax information when it suits them proves Donald Trump's audit excuse is a sham. If they can release some of the information, they can release all of the information. The only reason not to release his returns is to hide what's in them, such as financial connections with Russian oligarchs and the Kremlin. We're back with David K. Johnston, and we're joined now by Daniel Shaviro. He's a professor of taxation at NYU Law School. And Professor Shaviro, that's an interesting point. To my surprise, the DNC has made an interesting point, because I didn't think they would. But in the White House statements tonight, they are accepting all of the numbers that are in these released return pages, and that seems to indicate that they are, in effect, saying this is real, this is really it. And if they're willing to do that on these two pages, why wouldn't they be willing to do that on the rest of this return or on other returns?
Well, they don't want anything out that they don't have to have out. I guess there was nothing to lose at this point. So,
yeah.
But Yeah,
but David, they've always the DNC's point about they've always said there's audits. We can't release any of this because of the
there's
audits.
no proof that there's an audit. But I am reminded here of the Fifth Amendment rule. If you're going to invoke your Fifth Amendment right to not testify, you can't give half the answers and then invoke it. And that's what Trump's doing here in effect. Well, when I want, when it's convenient, when it's useful to me, I will put out a number. And not correct numbers in the White House statement, by the way. They inflated how much he paid in taxes.
Yes.
And they also gave a new hint of something by suggesting there's construction depreciation in that,
yes,
which I had figured this is almost certainly the residue of his dubious tax shelter that Congress had shut down that Dan and I had talked about on the show previously.
Yes, I want to go to that. The one little clue in the White House statement put out earlier was referring to the $103 million in losses reported on this return as being, at least in part, because of construction. That's the phrase they use, construction expenses.
I don't understand.
What does that tell us?
I don't understand why it would be there. I was assuming that was the net operating loss that was left over from the late 90s. So I would have thought that stuff would be in with the other gross income, that the income he shows would have been reduced by those things. So I don't understand that. I have to see other pages of the return in order to figure that one out.
What can you say about what we've learned just by looking at these summary pages?
Well, he was making a lot of money, and he had apparently used up his NOL, of course, as I think
his what?
His net operating loss. Sorry, this little shorthand there. He had used up. So there are people who thought he was paying zero forever after the late 90s, and it turns out that's not true. We never quite knew if he wanted to keep the tax return secret because he was paying tax or because he wasn't paying tax. So now we know a little more about that. Apparently, he actually was.
And David, it's hard for us to know whether this was. How good a year this was for Donald Trump.
Yes.
You know, was this the peak? Was this the high point? Was this, where was it?
Well, here's what we certainly do know, that he had a dubious tax shelter that the Republicans had shut down of $918 million. So no more than $103 million of that was left, and maybe there was none of it or less of it. That implies that in the previous 10 years, where he was writing off an average of $81.5 million a year, that he had $81.5 million a year of income each year to write off against it. That's what it implies. It means he made about at least $815 million in the previous 10 years.
But is there anything in here, Professor, that you could see where Donald Trump's public statement is present tense, I pay hundreds of millions of dollars in taxes. What we're seeing here is $38 million in taxes.
Well, if you do it times 10 years, I guess you get there.
I'd cut him some slack there, Lawrence. I think bad as Donald's grammar is, the word salad you get from Donald, I think he means over the years, that's what I'm paying.
Okay, so, and based on what we're seeing here, that is possible, that he's paid that much over the years.
Oh, sure.
And certainly going forward from there, what do we know, David, about his businesses and the successes of his businesses going forward from 2005? Have the years between now and 2005 been good to him or not as good to him as 2005 was?
You know, that we don't know. I mean, we know from his own lawsuit against Deutsche Bank to get out of a $40 million loan that the year 2008, surprise, surprise, was a terrible year for him. We know that he's gone heavily to branding. But he's made most of his big deals in places where they're not commercial transactions like we have in America. Notice Donald Trump doesn't do business in Germany or England or France, with the exception of the golf courses. He does them in places like Azerbaijan and Dubai.
Professor, before we go, what does it mean to the integrity of our tax system that the President of the United States refuses what has become the presidential tradition of this public disclosure to make it clear to the public, this is how I'm participating in our tax system. Here's how much I make, here's how much I pay. Our tax system relies tremendously on people's belief in its integrity so that they behave honestly in their interactions with the tax system.
I think that's pretty important, and it goes back to Nixon. Nixon was the one who made the rule by violating everything.
Yeah, we're going to have to leave it there. Professor Daniel Shaviro, David K. Johnston, thank you very much for joining us on this important night with that big breaking news. Really appreciate you joining us. Coming up, this is a fascinating situation. Steve Bannon, who'd been running Breitbart right up until he went into the White House in the Trump campaign. Why is Steve Bannon's Breitbart still attacking Paul Ryan when Donald Trump is trying to do business with Paul Ryan? What does Steve Bannon want, and why is Breitbart attacking the Trump healthcare bill? That's what everyone in Congress, the Democrats, Republicans, they're all asking. Why is Breitbart so viciously attacking the healthcare bill and viciously attacking Paul Ryan? Breitbart has now released a secret audio of Paul Ryan back during the campaign, after the Access Hollywood video of Donald Trump bragging about sexual assault was revealed. Paul Ryan telling his Republicans he would abandon Donald Trump. Let's listen to this.
His comments are not anywhere in keeping with our party's principles and values. There are basically two things that I want to make really clear. As for myself as your speaker, I am not going to defend Donald Trump. Not now, not in the future, and I'm not going to be campaigning with him over the next 30 days. Look, you guys know I have real concerns with our nominee.
Today, Paul Ryan defended those comments by saying he did, in fact, although he did not campaign with Donald Trump, he did campaign with Mike Pence. Listen to this.
Look, it's no secret Donald and I had our ups and downs. The president and I had our ups and downs during the campaign, but we merged forces at the end of the campaign. I campaigned with Mike Pence. I supported Donald Trump. We merged forces, and since then, we've been working hand in glove together. So, honestly, I got really thick skin. This is such an ancient history. I'm surprised it's even a story.
So why is Breitbart doing this? Why is Breitbart creating these problems for Paul Ryan, attacking Paul Ryan, and why is Breitbart attacking the Trump healthcare bill? It's Steve Bannon's Breitbart. That's next.
Tomorrow, the 11th hour with Brian Williams, weeknights at 11 on MSNBC.